Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask everyone to please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we're going to begin the funeral services of George I Balch PhD. Officiating remotely is Rabbi Nate Crane from Beth Hillel B'nai Emunah.
In addition to extending my most sincere and heartfelt condolences to Dr. George I Balch's family, I also want to extend my apologies that I'm not able to be there in person as I have tested positive for COVID-19. Each generation seeks comfort in those moments of loss. The generations who came before us turned to the same words of our tradition toward which we turn. We'll begin with a number of readings, starting first with Psalm 23. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar benot desha yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yinhaleni, nafshi yeshovev yinacheni v'magle tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begates al mavet lo ira ra ki ata imadi. Shivtecha mishanatecha heman yinachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorarai tishanta v'shemen roshi. Kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yerdefuni kol yemei chai. V'shavti b'veit Adonai le'orech yamim. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I dwell in the house of the Lord forever. A selection from the book of Malachi. Torat emet haita befihu, ve'avla lo nimtza b'savtav, b'shalom, u'mishor halach iti. True instruction was on his lips, and he did not give voice to injustice. He walked with Adonai in peace and honesty. The book of Job. Talmid chacham imet mi mevi lanu trumato, ki yesh la kesef motza u'makom lazahav yazku. There is no replacing a person of wisdom. There are mines for silver and places where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth and copper is smelted from the rock. But where can wisdom be found? And where is the source of understanding? There is no replacing a person of wisdom. From the book of Ecclesiastes. L'kol zman ve'et l'chol chefetz tachat hashamayim, et laledet ve'et lamut, et lata'at ve'et la'akor natua, Et laharog ve'et lirpo, et lifros ve'et livnot, et livkot ve'et lischok, et suphod ve'et rakod. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to slay and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to cry and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time for solitude, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time for silence and a time to speak. It is now our time to speak, to share memories and reflections of Dr. George I Balch, to ensure that George's memory remains eternal. And in our time to speak, we'll hear from a number of Dr. George I Balch, George's family members, and a close friend. We'll begin our reflections first with George's wife, Edie.
Okay. It's very hard to put together words to talk about your husband that you've been with forever. George, is that not coming through? Can you hear now? Yes. Feel like a phone commercial. Can you hear me now? George has been the love of my life for almost 60 years. We've been married 56 years. And he passed away on January 29th, which was our wedding anniversary. We got married when we were young. We were both in graduate school. We were immature, but we grew closer together as we got older, as opposed to further apart. And we became very supportive of each other. And George supported me in every part of my life. When I was 58 years old, George encouraged me to return to graduate school, pretty advanced age for a student, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. And he was responsible for encouraging me to do that. You know, I said, well, I'm 58, and by the time I finish this master's degree, I'll be 60 in 2 years. And he said, in 2 years, you'll be 60 whether you go to graduate school or not. So we were always partners in everything. How we spent our money, where we would live, where we would go on vacation, just everything about our lives. And I've just been very, very lucky to have him in my life. I will never stop missing him, and I certainly will never stop loving him.
Okay. I'm one of George's daughters, Lonnie. So I wrote something the other day, so I'm pretty much just going to read it. As you know, Saturday night, my father passed away after living with Alzheimer's disease for more than 8 years. And even though it feels like he's been gone for the last couple of years already, it hit me pretty hard to hear that he has passed. So I wanted to share some of the wonderful things that I remember about my father. He was the best listener I have ever known. He could listen to a problem I have and say it back to me in a way that makes it clear as to what I should do about it. He would just say, what I hear you saying is, and then he would say it in a way that had, wow, thank you for the advice. And he'd say, oh, I'm just saying what you were telling me. Okay. So he had this way of seeing things. He was willing to drop everything to be there for his family, and he did many times. We had the best conversations about all sorts of philosophical topics while on a road trip or randomly when snacking in the kitchen. He was a great dancer. He loved music. And we shared that, all of us actually. The whole family used to have dance parties in the living room when we were kids, just the four of us. He was very athletic and used to jump over our backyard fence in one fell swoop. He had a love for travel and learning languages and learning about other cultures. And my mom and sister and I share this as well. And I've honestly been missing him for years, because with Alzheimer's, as you know, it's been feeling like he's gone for a long time now. And I'm glad that he will finally be at peace, but I'm still very, very sad to let him go. And it's really difficult. That's about it. That's all I have.
I'm Dara, one of George Balch's daughters. I'm the older one. I totally remember those dance parties and just all the fun we shared together as family. Family was number one to my dad, just completely number one. He would drop everything for us and help us in any way possible. Even into my adulthood, when after Dan and I got married, we had an issue with a flood. He and Mom raced to help us to borrow a wet dry vac from a neighbor. And they came all the way out from Oak Park to Skokie to help us to unflood our basement. He would do anything to help anybody else. Just a very kind, caring, giving, loving person. A lifelong learner, lifelong educator, loved to share what he learned and loved to learn from others. And as a dad, I gotta tell you this one anecdote, and then I promise I'll be done. When Lonnie and I were younger and my mom was working or out of the house or whatever for a day, I was about 7, Lonnie was around 5-ish, and we got into it as siblings do, and we were arguing, and she hit me. And I went up to his office and knocked on the door, said, "Dad, Lonnie hit me." And he said, "Work it out with her." So I went back down the stairs and I hit her back. Lonnie ran back upstairs and said, "Hey, Dad, Dara hit me." He came downstairs and said, "See, you worked it out with her." So and he was just so loving. So anyway, we all miss him and we're all very grateful. He is no longer in pain and suffering from Alzheimer's. He's in heaven now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Daniel Urey. I'm George's son-in-law, and just like to say that we're going to miss George a lot. He was, again, a good listener and an excellent lecturer. I think one of my first meetings with him, meeting the family, we spoke about anti-Semitism. I mentioned that my parents were in France, and he brought up, well, there are lots of anti-Semites in France, and He spoke about his love of literature, and I think in one of our last discussions, he was lecturing me about Cervantes. And I think I sat at our kitchen table for a long time listening to him talk about this, one of your trips. So we'll miss him very much, and it's been a long road, and he's at peace in my mind. Thank you.
My name is Mark Iris, friend of George. We first kicked off our friendship in 1974. We were both young faculty members at what was then known as the Circle campus of U of I. We were both immigrants to Chicago from the old country, Brooklyn, and fellow alumni of Brooklyn College. George was clearly a dedicated and capable instructor and researcher, but I'm not going to comment on his long professional career. Admiration of his resume and CV is not what brings us here together today. And I certainly won't dwell on the last few years when Alzheimer's cruelly took away from George and his family and friends the person we knew, loved, and respected. A lifetime of intense exercise meant George's physical being outlived his mind. Let's recall then some of the more pleasant memories of George. Carry away with us those memories of a vigorous, brilliant, active, loving husband, father, friend, and colleague, and grandfather. In no particular order. George was a runner since about the age of 14, long before running became a popular pastime in this country. I can personally vouch, a jogger running through the streets of Brooklyn in 1960 would have been a very lonely athlete. George ran his first marathon in about 75. Midwest marathons are typically spring or fall events to avoid the extremes of weather. This one was unusual. It was a late fall or early winter race with an unseasonable cold snap. I clearly recall it was about 8 or 10 degrees at the starting line that morning. Under ideal conditions, a marathon is grueling. Running 26 plus miles in that cold is incomprehensible to me. The race was in the western suburbs. George finished it in fine form. Our friendship was in its early stages at that point. It was amazing to watch him cross the finish line. Over the years, as I got to know him better, clearly I should not have been amazed at his determination. And that energy was not restricted to the running paths. George, as noted, was an avid dancer. I can recall the energy and joy as he danced his way through Lonnie and Dara's bat mitzvah parties and Dara and Dan's wedding. Some of you might not know a little secret. George would schwitz so much dancing that he would often bring an extra shirt and change halfway through the celebrations. His delight in dancing made him a major fan of Gene Kelly movies like Singin' in the Rain and American in Paris. His intellect was not restricted to professional outlets. George took great pleasure in reading all of the Sherlock Holmes stories. Holmes' logic and deductive reasoning resonated deeply with George. And of course, as Edie and Dara and Lonnie have already mentioned, he was a solid family man, utterly devoted to Edie, his wife of more than half a century. Together they visited many corners of our planet, Ireland, Scandinavia, and Edie must have been reading my mind. I made note over here that a memory of happier times was this photo over here of George and Edie and the Galapagos tortoise. It hung on the wall of his room in the Auberge in Highland Park, where he spent his last months with us. Edie repaid George's devotion in kind, especially during his long illness. Many, many times she schlepped from Oak Park to Morton Grove and then to Highland Park to visit with George, spend many hours with him, and ensure that he had both companionship and was getting the best possible care possible. And as Lonnie and Dara mentioned, he was an utterly devoted and attentive father. George's decline, sadly, was already becoming evident by 2015. So sadly, Adam and Noah will have relatively few memories of George in his prime. I hope I speak for all of us here today. We must all have fond memories of George Balch. So as we honor George and say farewell, let us remember a life well lived. Zecher tzadik livracha. May the memory of the righteous be a blessing.
I'm going to take my mask off. I'm hard of hearing, so I'm going to try to talk real loud so you can hear me back there. I'm Bob Bell, and my wife and I are such old friends of George and Edie and their family. And I've been thinking about this for such a long time because of George's slipping away into his memory challenges. The first time I met George was when he came running along, grinning his famous friendly grin. He had the greatest smile, and he could really turn that smile on when he felt that friendly feeling. And as I approached, he said hello. As I approached running from across the street, he and his wife Edie and their 2 daughters lived 2 blocks away from our house on Kenilworth Avenue in Oak Park, across from the well-known high school gymnastics coach, Clark Schultes. And I had never met Clark, but I knew where he lived. And I said, hello, Clark. And that was the wrong name. It was George Balch. George acted, he didn't say anything. He didn't say, I'm not Clark. And he acted like he knew who I was. And I thought I knew who he was, but I was wrong. Since I wanted a new running partner, soon after our first meeting, we started running together. And then I found out who he really was and hoped he did not realize that I had originally thought he was somebody else. That was the beginning of a pretty long friendship and running many miles together. We met on George's front porch. We did some stretches, and then we began to run to meet Alex Rexroth on the north side, and then on to meet Oak Park Runners Club co-founder Steve Lawrence at his house near the Whittier Elementary School. Those were fast runners, and we had some great training workouts. Our runs were usually about an hour at an 8-minute per mile pace. And George had a distinctive running form. I don't know if you guys agree or not, but he was a high-stepping runner. He really had a lot of energy. And I was a bow-legged runner, so we made quite a pair running down the street together. We decided we needed some more up-to-date running outfits to help us run faster. So we went to the Competitive Foot in Oak Park, and we picked out sleek, one-piece, form-fitting Lycra racing suits. I don't know if you remember them, but they were just the ticket, and we only wore them at races, not for training runs. I don't know if that still exists at your house, Edie, but One of the joys of our running together was getting acquainted with each other. I learned a lot about George's growing up in Brooklyn, his education at Indiana University, his work with the well-known advertising firm, and his extended family. His mom was a widow who lived in Florida, and George regularly went there to help her with her bills and correspondence. She had been born in Europe and did not read English. Is that right, Edie? Yeah. And so the most important thing was getting to know George's wife, Edie, and daughters, Dara and Lanny. That was the reason my wife, Ellie, and I became good friends with Edie and George. One favorite joint activity was going together for dinner. If we went to a Mexican restaurant, George would always show off by conversing in Spanish, which he was so fluent at speaking Spanish. We especially enjoyed going to the exotic northwest side to the Central Euros Greek restaurant, remember? And that was on Central Avenue near Belmont. The bargain prices and the good eats were appreciated by all of us. We went to parties, theater, tennis. We played tennis together, remember that? And we watched movies and shared so many good times. We were lucky and honored to share important events in the Balch's lives. We attended Dara's bat mitzvah and wedding. We met their favorite aunt from New York City. Amen. And so many of the Balch's friends. I also love getting to consult with George and his friend George Janos about their only canoe camping trip in Minnesota. And that was the Minnesota wilderness. That was an uncharacteristic adventure for George, as far as I knew, because he had grown up in Brooklyn. And he had never learned to ride a bike that I remember, and let alone paddle a canoe in the wilderness. And George came back alive. So it was a memorable trip. Then we learned that George had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. That began a long period when Bob Hakes and Bob O'Connor met George to do track workouts together. When it was not safe for George to drive himself, they would pick George up after Edie helped him get dressed to run. I was honored to join them in this important activity. Eventually, George moved to the place where he could get the care he needed. We were lucky to be able to visit him a number of times, but we began grieving the loss of our friend. I have been thinking about how to put my memories on paper for several years, wishing, like all of you, that we could get through to our longtime friend. It seems that George accepted his plight. We have no choice but to do the same. But we will cherish our time together with a true friend. Our good memories are a gift from George.
The painful truth, as moments like this remind us, is we live in the shadow of human vulnerability, that none of us are destined to live forever, and any given day could be our last. And we're aware that we walk in a valley of the shadow of death, as we read together in Psalm 23. And there may be indeed, as I read a few moments ago from the book of Ecclesiastes, a set season for everything, a time for every experience. but the fate of humanity is to live with incomplete and imperfect knowledge of when these seasons may occur. So we have much to do. And we are reminded in these times that the day is short. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks wrote, "Leaders see the destination, begin the journey, and leave behind those who will continue it. And that is enough to endow a life with immortality." As we've heard from George's family and friends today, George had all the qualities of a wonderful leader who began the journey which will continue to benefit his family, leaving behind those who will continue his legacy and thereby endowing his life with immortality. As we've heard, and as his family shared with me, George was many things: brilliant, intelligent, thoughtful, caring, supportive, especially of family and friends, proactive and a good listener, scholarly, sweet, and affectionate. And one of the most important things in his life, which we know so well from the legacy that he leaves behind, is his passion for learning. The University of Illinois at Chicago professor of political science, as Mark was speaking about, following which he branched out into other behavioral sciences, became very interested in healthcare, and he characterized himself as more of a social scientist than a political scientist. And that brought him to Latin America. And his second major in Spanish served him very well. As we heard from Dara and Lonnie, we know that he loved his family so very much. As a special inspirer, encouraging everyone to try anything they were even moderately interested in. That if you didn't try, you couldn't succeed. George was essential in his family's life to support them in doing things that they weren't sure that they could do. And because of that encouragement, his family was able to accomplish so much in building their lives. Leon Uris, the novelist, taught that life hinges on many factors we cannot control. One of the most important factors we can control is we can manage our relationships. And what is life but a series of relationships here on earth within our lifespan? So we've heard today, George was exceptional at building, maintaining, and honoring relationships with so many, including lifelong friends with whom he built relationships beginning with fencing in high school and college and would continue throughout his lifetime. So too for running and those relationships as a charter of the Oak Park Runners Club, continuing his passion for running until he was admitted to the hospital. One of the aspects of George's life that I so dearly appreciated learning about was his partnership with Edie, which Edie and Dara both called a beautiful story. Starting in their college years, they would go on to celebrate, as Edie shared, 56 years of love and marriage and partnership, always supporting each other to ascend the highest, the greatest heights. And their model of love is a great lesson for which we should be grateful. Marcel Proust taught, "Let us be grateful to those people who make us happy, for they are the charming gardeners who make our souls blossom." As we've heard throughout the reflections today of George's family and friends, there are a great deal of people, a great many, who will be eternally grateful to George for all that he has left here on earth. and we understand truly how immortal George's memory will be. We know that when someone leaves this earth, the soul is believed to ascend heavenward. A loved one's presence and eternal legacy is likened to a ship sailing upon the horizon. The ship sails along the waves beyond our vision, yet we sense its presence. Because the ship is likened to a raft. When we seek comfort during times of adversity, the ship may serve as a type of cruise liner when we have joyous experience and naucous to share. And although the waters distance us from seeing the actual ship, we know it's still there. The ship's whistle in the wind reminds us of the still small voice of those we lovingly remember, their image found in photographs, stories remembered. It's as if they're just there on the horizon. And this ship contains a treasure chest of memories for us to cherish forever. Tien nishmata tzura b'tzura chaim. May the soul of Dr. George I Balch be bound up in the bonds of everlasting life. May his memory be a blessing. And together we say, Amen. It's now that we will rise for our memorial prayer. El malei rachamim, shochein bamromim. Amitzei menucha nachona tachat kanfei hashchina, b'ma'alot kedoshim matorim kezorah harakim mashirim, et nishmat George Balch. Shalach lo olamo v'gan eden tehei menuchato, ana balarachamim. Asti rehu beseter konfecha leolamim. Utzvor betzor chaim en nishmato Adonai lachalato. V'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar. Amen. El Malay Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of our beloved George Balch, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service will continue at Memorial Park Cemetery. It's 9900 Grosse Point Road here in Skokie. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing many of the cars with a flag that will be affixed to the top portion of your car. And for your own personal safety, I strongly recommend using your horn liberally as you're going through the intersections. And please do not speak or text on your cellular phone while driving to the cemetery. Due to COVID-19, there will be no public shiva, and memorial contributions to the Association for Alzheimer's Research would be appreciated. For the people that are joining us on live stream, that information is on our website. And for those of you who are here, that information is on the service folder. At this time, I ask everyone to please rise and stand in place as we escort the casket of Dr. George I. Balch from the chapel. Then you may return to your cars.